I'm Jessica, 34, and every year I return to my parents' suburban home for Thanksgiving like a ritual. This year, my sister Allison dropped her bombshell during turkey carving. I just bought a gorgeous home in Oakwood Hills. Then she turned to me with that smile. When will you settle down, Jess? The table fell silent. I felt 20 pairs of eyes burning into me, judging my apartment, my singlehood, my choices. It wasn't the first time, but something was different this year. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had your family question your life choices during holiday dinner. To understand what happened at that Thanksgiving table, you need to understand my family. We're the Millers, picture perfect on Christmas cards but complicated underneath, like most families. My father Thomas, 62, recently retired after 30 years as an executive at Midwest Financial. Dad built his identity around providing stability, the steady job, the family home in the suburbs, the 401k, the whole package. He's a man who measures success in tangible assets, property owned, retirement funds secured, and family legacy established. Every decision he's made has been calculated and traditional, and he's always expected his children to follow the same reliable path. Mom, Diane, 59, dedicated her life to creating the perfect home. She's the neighborhood committee chair, church volunteer coordinator, and has hosted every family holiday since I can remember. Her world revolves around family milestones, weddings, baby showers, christenings, graduations. She's collected wedding magazines since Allison and I were teenagers, occasionally leaving them open to dress pages when I visit. Subtle, Mom. Then there's my sister Allison, 31, who has followed our parents' playbook to the letter. College, met Greg at 23, married by 25, solid banking job that she reduced to part-time after marriage. Allison has always been the good daughter, the one who calls weekly, brings casseroles when someone's sick, and never misses a family function. She's not malicious about it, but there's always been an unspoken competition between us, with her firmly in the lead according to the Miller family scoreboard. Greg, her husband of 6 years, works in commercial real estate finance. He's pleasant enough, if somewhat forgettable, the kind of man who blends perfectly into family photos and country club gatherings. He supports Allison in everything, and they present a united front of conventional success. And then there's me. I didn't exactly rebel, I just chose differently. After college, instead of settling in our hometown like Allison, I moved to Chicago. I started at an entry-level marketing position and worked my way up through 3 companies. Now, I'm senior marketing director at TechFuture, a startup that's revolutionizing accessibility technology. I live in a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I travel internationally for work and pleasure. I date when I meet someone interesting, but I've never felt the need to force a relationship just to check a box. My family never understood why I would waste my potential on grueling 60-hour work weeks instead of finding a nice man and starting a family. They don't see that I'm building something meaningful, something that's mine. The tension started small. My mother asking if I'd met anyone special every time we spoke on the phone. My father questioning my financial decisions, despite my salary now exceeding what he made before retirement. Allison sending me listings for suburban homes near them, just in case you want to move back someday. Holiday gatherings became minefields. 2 Christmases ago, my aunt asked when I was going to give my parents grandchildren, and I mentioned that might not be in my plans. You'd think I'd announce plans to join a cult. My mother cried in the kitchen later that night. Last Easter, my father cornered me to discuss freezing my eggs, while there's still time, as though my biological clock was a ticking bomb threatening the family structure. I explained that parenthood wasn't a priority for me right now, and he looked at me like I'd slapped him. Through it all, Allison maintained her position as family golden child. She never openly criticized my choices, but her concerned, "I'm just worried about you being lonely," comments stung worse than direct attacks. There was always the subtext. I was doing life wrong, and she was doing it right. Don't get me wrong, I love my family deeply. My parents worked hard to give us opportunities and stability. Allison and I shared a bedroom for 16 years and were best friends throughout childhood. The rift between us now isn't about lack of love. It's about different definitions of a life well lived. And that's the heart of my internal conflict. I'm proud of what I've built, the challenges I've overcome, the independence I've earned. Just last month, I was promoted after landing the biggest client in company history. My team respects me. I have friends who understand my choices because they've made similar ones. But there's a small, persistent voice that wonders if my family might be right. When I return to my apartment after an 80-hour work week to silence instead of someone waiting for me, I sometimes question my path. When I see Allison's holiday photos with Greg, looking content in their matching sweaters, a pang of something, not quite envy, but something adjacent, hits me. I want my family's acceptance without having to conform to their expectations. I want them to see that my version of success is just as valid as theirs. I want to stop feeling defensive every time I walk through their front door. That's the baggage I brought to Thanksgiving this year. Years of subtle judgment, mounting frustration, and exhaustion of constantly justifying my existence to the people who are supposed to love me unconditionally. So when Allison asked when I was going to settle down across the Thanksgiving table, it wasn't just an innocent question. It was the latest battle in a long-running war over whose life choices were more valid. And this year, something inside me had reached its breaking point. I arrived at my parents' house at 2 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day, having driven 3 hours from Chicago that morning. Maple Street hadn't changed since my childhood. The same row of colonial-style homes with perfectly maintained lawns, now decorated with tasteful fall wreaths and the occasional inflatable turkey. My parents' 2-story brick house looked exactly as it always had, my father's pride and joy, with its neatly trimmed hedges and American flag by the door. The maple tree in the front yard where Allison and I had once built a treehouse had grown taller, but otherwise, time seemed suspended here, as though the house existed in its own bubble of 1990s suburban perfection. I parked behind my father's immaculately maintained Buick and sat for a moment, taking deep breaths. Just get through today, I whispered to myself, a pre-holiday mantra I developed over the years. I grabbed the bottle of wine and homemade cranberry sauce from the passenger seat and headed inside. The familiar scent hit me immediately: cinnamon, turkey, my mother's signature sage stuffing. Christmas music played softly from the kitchen speakers, though my mother always started the holiday music well before Thanksgiving. Some traditions never changed. There she is, my mother called, emerging from the kitchen in her apron, auburn hair perfectly styled despite hours of cooking. We were starting to worry. Traffic was fine, Mom. I'm right on time. I leaned in for her hug, enveloped in the scent of her usual perfume mixed with baking spices. My father appeared from the living room, reading glasses perched on his nose. The prodigal daughter returns, he said with a smile that contained both warmth and something else. Expectation, perhaps. How's the big city treating you? It's good, Dad. Busy with a new promotion. Still working you to the bone, I see. He shook his head slightly. There's more to life than work, Jessica. And so it began not even 5 minutes through the door. I headed to the kitchen to help my mother, falling into our well-rehearsed dance of food preparation. I'd been assigned the same task since high school: whipping the potatoes, arranging the relish tray, setting the table with the good china that only emerged for holidays. Allison and Greg should be here any minute, my mother said, checking the turkey. She's been so busy with the new house. Wait until you see the photos. It's just perfect for them. Plenty of room for a growing family. I focused intently on the potatoes. That's great. I'm happy for them. And what about that nice project manager you mentioned? Daniel, was it? David, I corrected. And that was just a few dates. Nothing serious. My mother sighed, almost imperceptibly. Well, you never know unless you give someone a real chance, dear. The doorbell saved me from responding. I heard my father's booming welcome, followed by Allison's voice and Greg's deeper tones. I plastered on a smile and went to greet them. Allison looked radiant, her blonde hair styled in loose waves, wearing a burgundy sweater dress that complemented her fair complexion. She'd always been the conventionally pretty one, with her delicate features and easy smile. Greg stood beside her in a blue button-down and khakis, the universal uniform of non-threatening masculinity. "Jess." Allison embraced me tightly. "God, it's been months. You look—" She paused, her eyes taking in my city-chic black dress and boots. "So professional." I knew it wasn't meant as an insult, but the implication hung there, professional instead of relaxed, polished instead of comfortable, working instead of living. "Thanks, Allie. You look great, too." Greg gave me an awkward side hug. "The marketing guru. How's the rat race treating you?" Before I could answer, my father directed everyone to the living room for pre-dinner drinks. My mother had arranged photo albums on the coffee table, a holiday tradition designed to prompt reminiscence and, increasingly in recent years, to remind me of happier family times when we were all under one roof. "Oh my goodness, look at baby Jessica in her ballet costume," Allison cooed, flipping through pages. "You were so cute before you got all serious." My mother passed around glasses of mulled cider, her specialty. "I was looking at these last week and couldn't believe how quickly time has passed. It seems like just yesterday you girls were fighting over toys, and now look at you, all grown up with your own lives." Speaking of which, my father interjected, turning to me, "How's the dating scene in Chicago? A beautiful, successful woman like you must have men lining up." I took a long sip of cider. "I date occasionally, Dad. I'm just focused on other things right now." "Like that promotion," Allison said. "Congratulations, by the way. What exactly does a senior marketing director do all day?" I began explaining my role, the major campaign I'd just launched, the team I managed, but I could see eyes glazing over by the time I mentioned digital analytics. My father checked his watch. My mother disappeared to the kitchen. Greg nodded politely while clearly thinking about something else entirely. "Anyway," I concluded, "it's challenging but rewarding." "Sound exhausting," Allison said sympathetically. "I'm so glad I cut back my hours. Life's too short to spend it all at the office." My mother saved me by announcing dinner was ready. We moved to the dining room, where the table was set with her best china, crystal glasses, and the silver candlesticks that had belonged to my grandmother. The turkey sat glistening at the center, surrounded by all the traditional sides: stuffing, cranberry sauce, green bean casserole, sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows, Parker house rolls. We took our usual seats, my father at the head, my mother at the foot, Allison and Greg on one side, me alone on the other. The empty chair beside me seemed to scream my singleness to everyone present. My father said grace, thanking God for family, health, and prosperity. We passed dishes around, filled plates, and settled into the initial comfortable silence of people enjoying good food. "So," my mother began, "tell Jessica about the house." Allison's face lit up. "Oh my God, Jess, it's perfect. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, in Oakwood Hills. You know, that new development with the community pool and tennis courts? It has the most gorgeous kitchen with marble countertops and a farmhouse sink. The primary suite has a sitting area and walk-in closets for both of us. There's a bonus room over the garage that Greg is turning into his office, and the backyard is big enough for a play structure." When she trailed off, glancing at Greg with a secretive smile that told me exactly what they were planning next. "It sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. I was happy for my sister, even if her life choices weren't mine. "We close next month," Greg added. Allison's already picked out paint colors for every room, including the nursery, my mother added with barely contained excitement. My father raised his glass to Allison and Greg, taking the next step in building their lives together. "Your mother, and I couldn't be prouder." We all clinked glasses. I took a larger sip of wine than was strictly necessary. "It's such a relief to be settling into our forever home," Allison continued. "No more renting, no more temporary solutions. We're putting down roots." She turned to me, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something else. Concern? Pity? Superiority? "What about you, Jess? Any thoughts about buying property?" I know Chicago real estate is expensive, but you must be doing well with that big promotion. When will you settle down? And there it was. The question that had been hovering all evening, now laid bare across the Thanksgiving table like another dish to be served. Every eye turned to me, waiting for my response. The silence felt eternal as everyone stared, forks paused midair, expressions expectant. Heat crawled up my neck and into my cheeks. My stomach dropped, as though I'd missed a step on a staircase. The turkey on my plate suddenly looked unappetizing. In that moment, a lifetime of similar moments flashed through my mind. Allison's college graduation, when relatives asked why I had chosen marketing instead of something stable like teaching. My cousin's wedding, where I was the only bridesmaid without a plus one. Last Christmas, when my grandmother had patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, dear, the right man is out there somewhere," as though my accomplishments meant nothing without a wedding ring. Behind my frozen smile, my thoughts raced. I could tell them about the luxury condo building I'd been considering. I could mention the dates I'd been on recently. I could defend my choices, explain my 5-year plan, justify my existence. Instead, I forced a light laugh and reached for my wine glass. Oh, you know me. I'm still enjoying city life too much to think about settling in the suburbs. This cranberry sauce is delicious, Mom. Did you try a new recipe? My mother, ever sensitive to tension, eagerly accepted the change of subject. Yes. I added orange zest this year. I was worried it would be too tart, but I think it worked out well. I kept my focus on my plate, methodically cutting turkey into precise pieces, as the conversation temporarily shifted to cranberry sauce preparation. But the momentary reprieve couldn't last. "You know," my mother said, turning back to me, "your father and I were talking about how quiet the house feels now. All those bedrooms empty, except when you girls visit. It's a shame," my father added. "This house was meant for family, for grandchildren running up and down the stairs like you two used to do." "There's still time for that," Allison said cheerfully. "Once we're settled in the new house, we're hoping to start trying. Greg's company has an excellent maternity and paternity leave policy." Greg nodded. "We've been talking about 2, maybe 3 kids. I grew up as an only child, and I always wanted siblings." "The blue bedroom would make a perfect nursery," Allison continued, fully in her element now. "It gets such beautiful morning light, and it's right across from the primary bedroom, so we'd hear the baby right away." Every word was a tiny paper cut to my confidence. I had just secured a promotion that doubled my salary. I managed a team of 12 talented professionals. Our latest campaign had increased client revenue by 38%. Yet here, in this dining room, none of that mattered. The only currency of value was marriage and procreation. As they continued discussing the future grandchildren as though they were already on the way, doubt crept in despite my best defenses. Was I missing something fundamental? Was my resistance to traditional milestones depriving me of some essential human experience? I thought about my downtown apartment, stylish and modern, but sometimes echoing with silence when I returned late from the office. I thought about last Valentine's Day, spent reviewing marketing proposals while watching Netflix. I thought about my married friends who'd gradually disappeared into their domestic lives, our text conversations increasingly dominated by their children's accomplishments. But then I remembered what those friends didn't see. The exhilaration of landing a major client after weeks of preparation, the satisfaction of mentoring junior team members and watching them succeed, the freedom to book a last-minute flight to Barcelona because an interesting conference opportunity arose. My life had richness and purpose. It just wasn't the kind my family recognized. "Excuse me for a minute," I said, placing my napkin beside my plate. "I need to use the restroom." I escaped upstairs to the bathroom I'd once shared with Allison, closing the door and leaning against it. The same floral wallpaper had hung there since my teenage years. The same seashell-shaped soap dish sat by the sink. Time stood still in this house while I had moved forward. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to smudge my makeup, and stared at my reflection. Professional. Polished. Accomplished. Alone? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Natalie, my colleague and closest friend in Chicago. Hope the family inquisition isn't too brutal. Just FYI, Kaplan confirmed they're increasing their budget by 50% next quarter. Your pitch sealed the deal. You're a rock star. Drinks to celebrate when you're back. I smiled at the timing. A small reminder of the world I'd built for myself, the value I created, the respect I'd earned. I texted back a quick thanks and promised details later. With a deep breath, I composed myself and returned to the dining room, where dessert was being served, my mother's famous pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream. "There you are," my mother said. I was about to send a search party. Sorry, just had to respond to a quick work message. I slid back into my seat. On Thanksgiving? My father frowned. Can't they give you one day off? It was good news, actually. We landed a major account increase. That's nice, dear, my mother said dismissively. Allison was just telling us about the community garden in their new neighborhood. They're going to grow their own vegetables next summer. Greg's grandmother gave us her heirloom tomato seeds, Allison added. It'll be so special to pass down that tradition to our children someday. I nodded and focused on my pie, trying to appreciate the perfect balance of spices that my mother always achieved. I attempted to steer the conversation toward neutral territory. How's Uncle Frank doing after his surgery? This worked temporarily, leading to updates on various extended family members' health concerns, job changes, and children's accomplishments. I nodded in the right places, asked appropriate follow-up questions, and maintained a pleasant expression. But Allison wasn't finished with her moment in the spotlight. We should all go shopping tomorrow, she suggested. I need to look at paint swatches for the house, and there's a great new home goods store at the mall. Jessica, you could help me pick out some throw pillows for the guest room. You've always had a good eye for design. The guest room that you'll be staying in when you visit, my mother added pointedly. Won't it be nice to have your own space when you come home, instead of going back to that empty apartment in the city? And just like that, we were back to the implication that my life was somehow incomplete, temporary, a holding pattern until I settled down into what they considered a real adult life. I forced another smile and took the last bite of my pie. The evening stretched ahead like an obstacle course of potential emotional landmines, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could maintain my composure. After dessert, we moved to the living room for the Miller family Thanksgiving tradition, sharing what we were grateful for this year. It had started when Allison and I were children, a way to focus on blessings rather than material things before the Christmas season began. Over the years, it had evolved into something more complex, a subtle competition, a performance of proper gratitude, a status report on life milestones. We sat in our usual spots, my parents on the love seat, Allison and Greg on the couch, me in the armchair by the window. The fire crackled in the fireplace, family photos watched from every surface, and the Christmas tree stood half-decorated in the corner, waiting for tomorrow's annual trimming session. My father went first, as was tradition. He cleared his throat and sat up straighter. This year, I'm grateful for my retirement and the time it's given me with your mother. After 40 years of working, I'm thankful to enjoy the fruits of that labor, our home, our health, and our beautiful family. I'm grateful that the values of hard work, commitment, and family that my father instilled in me have been passed down to the next generation. He glanced meaningfully at Allison and Greg. And I look forward to those values continuing for generations to come. My mother dabbed at her eyes. She always grew emotional during this ritual and took her turn. I'm thankful for this home that has sheltered our family through so many seasons of life. I'm thankful for the traditions we maintain, bringing us together despite busy lives and distance. I'm especially grateful this year for Allison and Greg's new home, another branch of our family tree putting down roots. She smiled tearfully. And I'm thankful for the promise of new beginnings that this coming year holds for all of us. The subtext was clear, and all eyes shifted briefly to Allison's still flat stomach. Allison straightened up, her hand finding Greg's. This year, I'm grateful for growth and new chapters. I'm thankful for finding our forever home and for the opportunity to create the same kind of loving household that Mom and Dad provided for us growing up. I'm grateful for Greg's support and partnership as we build our future together. She looked directly at me. And I'm thankful for family who will always be there, no matter what paths we choose in life. Greg nodded along with Allison's words before adding his own gratitudes, mostly echoing hers, with additional thanks for his recent promotion and the financial security it provided for their growing family plans. Then it was my turn. I prepared something safe and neutral during the drive down. Gratitude for my health, my job security in uncertain economic times, my supportive friends. Nothing that would rock the boat or invite further scrutiny of my life choices. I took a deep breath. This year, I'm grateful for... Oh, Allison interrupted, her hand flying to her mouth. I completely forgot to mention, the house has this amazing home office space that would be perfect for remote work. Jessica, if you ever wanted to visit for extended periods, you could totally work from there. It might give you a taste of what life outside the city could be like. Something inside me snapped. The careful dam I had built to contain years of frustration, hurt, and resentment suddenly broke, and words poured out before I could stop them. What I'm grateful for, I said, my voice unnaturally calm, is the strength to build a life that fulfills me, even when that life doesn't match other people's expectations. The room fell silent. My mother's eyes widened. My father shifted uncomfortably. For years, I've sat at this table and listened to subtle, and not so subtle, comments about my choices. About my apartment being empty. About my job being a phase, until I settle down. About my accomplishments meaning less because they don't include a husband or children. Jessica, that's not what my mother began, but I held up my hand. Please let me finish. I love you all, and I know you want what's best for me. But there's an assumption in this family that there's only one definition of success, only one path to happiness. Buy a house in the suburbs, get married, have children, and that's a beautiful path for those who want it. I turned to Allison, whose mouth had formed a perfect O of surprise. I'm genuinely happy for you and Greg. Your new house sounds perfect for the life you want. But when you ask when I'm going to settle down, there's a judgment in that question, an implication that I'm somehow unsettled, unstable, or incomplete. My voice grew stronger. Do you want to know what settling down looks like for me? It's the career I've built from nothing. It's the team I've assembled that's breaking company records. It's the financial independence that means I'll never need to rely on anyone else for security. I could see my father's face reddening, but I couldn't stop now. Last month, I was promoted to senior marketing director. My salary increased by 60%. The campaign I developed is being used as a case study at marketing conferences. I work with technology that's helping people with disabilities communicate more effectively. My work has meaning and impact. I took a shaky breath. But none of that seems to matter here. The only questions I get are about dating, about when I'll give up my career ambitions to follow the script you've written for me. And it hurts. It hurts to have the life I've chosen, the life I've worked incredibly hard for, dismissed as somehow lacking. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I'm not asking you to understand my choices. I'm asking you to respect that they are mine to make, and that my version of settling down might look different from yours. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw clenched in that familiar way that signaled disapproval. Greg stared intently at the carpet. And Allison looked both shocked and offended, as though I'd slapped her across the face. Well, my mother finally said, her voice trembling, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We just want you to be happy, Jessica.
No, I rappelé Jean-Lee.
You want me to be happy in the specific way you understand happiness. That's different. My father cleared his throat. You're being overdramatic. Nobody is dismissing your career accomplishments. But there are realities you need to consider. You're 34. If you want a family, Dad, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The assumption that I must want the same things you wanted. That if I don't, there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with wanting our daughter to have companionship, my mother interjected. To not be alone. But I'm not alone. I have friends, colleagues, mentors, a community I've built. Being single doesn't mean being isolated or lonely. Allison finally spoke, her voice tight with hurt. I was just asking a simple question at dinner. I didn't realize it would trigger some kind of feminist manifesto. The dismissive tone was the final straw. It wasn't a simple question, Allison. It was a loaded one, and you know it. It was a way of highlighting your choices as the right ones and mine as lacking. Just like every concerned comment about my biological clock, every sad look when I mention work achievements instead of relationship status, every suggestion that my apartment is just a temporary stop until my real life begins. That's unfair, Allison said, standing up. I've always supported your choices. I'm the one who defended you when Aunt Martha said your lifestyle was selfish at the 4th of July barbecue. Defended me? The fact that my lifestyle needs defending is exactly the problem. Greg awkwardly tried to intervene. Ladies, it's Thanksgiving. Maybe we should stay out of this, Greg. Allison and I said simultaneously, a rare moment of sisterly unity. My father stood up, assuming his familiar role as family authority. That's enough. Jessica, you're overreacting and ruining Allison's moment. She's excited about her new home, as she should be. Not everything is a personal attack on your alternative lifestyle choices. Alternative lifestyle choices. I repeated incredulously. Being career-focused and single isn't an alternative lifestyle. It's just my life. A life that you seem determined to defend rather than examine, my father countered. Maybe if you spent less time being defensive and more time being honest with yourself about what you really want. What I really want, I interrupted, standing up and reaching for my coat, is to be accepted by my family without having to conform to their narrow definition of success. What I really want is to celebrate my sister's happiness without having my own choices questioned. What I really want is to enjoy a holiday meal without feeling like I'm on trial for the crime of living differently. My mother was openly crying now. Jessica, please don't leave. We can talk about this. But the familiar pattern was clear. My feelings would be dismissed as overreaction. Allison would be comforted for having her special moment ruined. And, by dessert tomorrow, we'd be pretending nothing had happened, the underlying issues unaddressed yet again. I think I need some air, I said, pulling on my coat. I'll be back later. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my purse, slipped into my boots by the door, and walked out into the cold November evening. Behind me, I could hear my mother's distressed voice, my father's stern tones, Allison's tearful protests. I got into my car and drove aimlessly through the neighborhood streets, past decorated homes with warm light spilling from windows, families gathered inside. Eventually, I found myself at Riverside Park, where Allison and I had played as children. I parked and walked to the old wooden bench overlooking the small pond, now partially frozen at the edges. Sitting alone as darkness fell, I wondered if I'd gone too far, said too much, burned bridges that couldn't be repaired. But beneath the guilt and uncertainty, there was something else, a sense of relief, of finally having spoken my truth after years of silent accommodation. The pond at Riverside Park reflected the cloudy night sky, occasionally rippled by a light breeze. The same pond where I'd learned to skip stones, where Allison and I had sailed paper boats on summer days, where our father had taught us to fish with child-sized rods. Family memories were embedded in every corner of this town. I huddled deeper into my coat, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. The park was deserted on Thanksgiving evening, everyone else tucked away in warm homes with their families. I felt both utterly alone and strangely peaceful. Had I overreacted? The question circled in my mind. Perhaps I could have chosen a better moment, a more private setting for this conversation. Perhaps I could have been gentler in my delivery. But the content of what I'd said, that needed saying, had needed saying for years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Natalie's name flashed on the screen. I answered, my fingers stiff with cold. Hey, how's the family inquisition going? She asked cheerfully. When I didn't immediately respond, her tone changed. Jess, what happened? I sort of exploded at dinner, I admitted, recounting the evening's events while staring at the still water before me. Natalie listened without interruption, a quality that made her both an excellent friend and an effective marketing strategist. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. First of all, she finally said, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. And second, everything you said was valid." But was it necessary? My mother was crying, Natalie. Sometimes tears are part of important conversations. Listen, I've watched you contort yourself into a pretzel every holiday to avoid rocking the boat. You deserve to have your choices respected, not just tolerated. My family does love me, I said, feeling defensive of them despite everything. Of course they do. But love without respect is just concern. And you're not a concern case, Jess. You're a success story. As we talked, my mind drifted to pivotal moments in my career journey, moments that had shaped me, challenged me, fulfilled me in ways my family never fully understood. I remembered my first big promotion 5 years ago, after I'd worked nights and weekends for months on a rebranding campaign. The VP had called me into his office, and I'd been certain I was being fired for some oversight. Instead, he'd offered me a management position with a substantial raise. I'd called my parents immediately, eager to share the news. My father had asked if the health benefits were good. My mother had mentioned that a stable job would make me more attractive to potential husbands. I thought about the international business trip to Tokyo 2 years ago, my first time presenting to global executives. I'd been terrified but prepared, and my presentation had secured a multi-million-dollar partnership. That night, I'd walked through the neon-lit streets of Shinjuku, filled with a sense of accomplishment and possibility. I'd video called Allison to share the experience, but she'd been distracted by wedding venue selections, our conversation cut short by her appointment with a caterer. Most recently, there was the Accessibility Project, developing marketing strategies for a revolutionary text-to-speech app that helped nonverbal children communicate with their families. I'd worked closely with the development team, conducted focus groups with parents, refined messaging to reach the communities who needed this technology most. At the product launch, a mother had approached me with tears in her eyes, thanking me for helping spread the word about a tool that had allowed her to hear her daughter's thoughts for the first time. That moment had filled me with a sense of purpose that no traditional milestone could match. You know what the problem is? Natalie was saying, pulling me back to our conversation. They can't see what you've built because it doesn't look like what they expected. But that doesn't make it less valuable or meaningful. I know that intellectually. I sighed. It's the emotional part that's complicated. Of course it is. These are your family patterns. They run deep. Natalie paused. But consider this. What if your different path isn't just valid for you, but important for them to see? What if Allison's daughter someday wants a career instead of an immediate family? What if your stance creates space for future generations to make truly free choices? The thought was both empowering and sobering. I wasn't just defending my choices. I was potentially expanding the definition of success for others who might come after me. We talked a while longer. Natalie sharing her own family dynamics, her mother's passive-aggressive comments about her decision to freeze her eggs, her father's confusion about why she declined a management track to stay in creative work. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in navigating these waters. After we hung up, I remained on the bench, reflecting more deeply on my life's satisfactions and challenges. Yes, there were moments of loneliness. Eating dinner alone after a long day, having no one to share inside jokes with, navigating illnesses without a partner's support. But there were also profound joys, the freedom to accept last-minute opportunities, deep friendships formed through shared interests rather than proximity, the satisfaction of solving complex problems with my own ingenuity. I thought about what settling down truly meant to me. Not the absence of change or growth, but rather establishing firm foundations for a life of purpose and meaning. In many ways, I had already settled down into my values, my strengths, my authentic self. The misconception was that settling down required another person to be complete. For some, like Allison, partnership was central to their vision of fulfillment. For me, it was an option but not a necessity, a potential enhancement to an already whole life. not the foundation upon which everything else was built. As the evening grew colder, I made a decision. I would return to my parents' house, not to apologize for my feelings, but to attempt a more productive conversation. I wouldn't back down for my truth, but I would try to create understanding rather than defensiveness. These patterns wouldn't change overnight, but perhaps we could begin to build something new, a family dynamic based on mutual respect for different paths. I drove back slowly, rehearsing what I might say. No accusations, no defensiveness, just honest communication about how certain comments made me feel and what kind of support I actually needed from my family. I would acknowledge their concern came from love, even as I established boundaries around how that concern was expressed. As I pulled into the driveway, lights still blazed from the windows. They had waited up for me. Despite everything, there was comfort in that simple fact. They cared enough to wait, to worry, to want resolution. I sat in my car for a few more minutes, gathering my courage. This wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, not just for this holiday, but for all our future interactions. I was no longer willing to diminish myself to maintain false harmony. It was time for my family to see me as I truly was, not as they wished me to be. With renewed resolve, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, ready to advocate for my vision of a settled, fulfilled life, one that might look different from theirs but was no less valid or complete. I opened the front door quietly, removing my boots in the entryway. The house was silent except for muted voices coming from the living room. I hung up my coat and followed the sound, finding my family exactly as I'd left them. My parents on the love seat, Allison and Greg on the couch. The only difference was their posture. Tense, concerned, waiting. They all looked up simultaneously when I entered. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, my father's expression guarded. Allison looked somewhere between hurt and angry. Greg just looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Jessica, my mother started, half rising. We were so worried. I'm sorry for leaving like that, I said, taking a seat in the armchair. I needed some space to collect my thoughts. An awkward silence followed. No one seemed to know how to proceed after the emotional eruption earlier. I'd like to try again, I finally said. I apologize for my abrupt departure and for raising my voice. But I stand by what I said about how I've been feeling. My father cleared his throat. Jessica, we understand you're proud of your career. Nobody is diminishing that. But your reaction tonight was disproportionate to a simple question from your sister. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. Dad, it wasn't just about tonight. It was about a pattern that's existed for years, a pattern where my life choices are treated as temporary or somehow less valid than the traditional path. We've never said that, my mother protested weakly. Not directly, perhaps, but it's been implied countless times. When you talk about my apartment as empty rather than my home. When you change the subject after I share work accomplishments. When you frame my singleness as a problem to be solved rather than a status that might be intentional. Allison crossed her arms defensively. Not everyone is attacking you, Jessica. Sometimes a question is just a question. I turned to my sister. Allie, how would you feel if every time you shared news about your house or your marriage, I immediately asked when you were going to focus on your career again? If I implied that your choices were limiting your potential or making you dependent on Greg? If I suggested your life was somehow incomplete because you prioritize different things than I do? She blinked, considering this. That would feel judgmental. Exactly. And that's how it feels when my different priorities are constantly questioned. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We just want you to be happy, Jessica. We worry about you being alone. Mom, I need you to hear me. I am not alone. I'm single, which is different. I have deep friendships, meaningful work, a community I've built. And if I eventually choose to share my life with someone, it will be in addition to an already fulfilling existence, not a solution to a problem. My father shifted uncomfortably. The real world has certain realities, Jessica. Security, family support networks, legacy, these things matter in the long run. I know they do, Dad. but I've built security my own way. My investment portfolio is diversified. I have excellent health and disability insurance. I've established a network of mutual support with friends and colleagues. I leaned forward. And as for legacy, that brings me to something I haven't shared with you yet. All eyes were on me now, curiosity temporarily overriding tension. Remember that historic Jenkins building downtown that's been vacant for years? The red brick one with the Art Deco details. My father nodded slowly. The old publishing house? What about it? I'm in final negotiations to purchase it, I said, watching their expressions shift from confusion to surprise. With a group of investors, I'm converting it into affordable workspace for women entrepreneurs, with an emphasis on supporting mothers returning to the workforce and women from disadvantaged backgrounds starting their first businesses. Silence fell as they processed this information. You're buying a building? Allison asked incredulously.
Yes.
The down payment comes from my savings and investments. We've secured favorable financing based on the community impact projections. The upper floors will be revenue-generating office space that subsidizes the incubator program on the main level. My father's brow furrowed in that familiar way when he was mentally calculating figures. That's a major investment. Have you considered the risks, the maintenance costs, property taxes? Yes, Dad. I interrupted gently. I've done extensive due diligence. The business plan projects profitability within 3 years, with significant social impact metrics from day one. Why didn't you tell us about this before? My mother asked, looking genuinely hurt. I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. Because I was afraid it would be dismissed as another phase or career obsession, rather than recognized as the meaningful contribution I intend it to be. The pain in her eyes told me my words had hit home. This project matters to me. I continued more softly. It's about creating opportunities for women who might otherwise be overlooked. It's about transforming a historic building into a space for future innovation. It's about leaving something lasting that reflects my values. That sounds impressive, my father admitted reluctantly. It's my version of putting down roots, I explained. Different from buying a house in the suburbs, but no less significant or permanent. Greg, who had been silent throughout, suddenly spoke. It's like what my sister did in Boston with that co-working space. Started small, but now it's helping hundreds of small businesses get off the ground. I gave him a grateful look for the unexpected support. My mother seemed to be processing everything slowly. I never realized. I mean, you always seemed so busy with work, but I didn't understand it was for something like this. Because we don't really talk about my work, Mom. You ask if I'm dating anyone, if I'm eating properly, if my apartment is safe, all valid concerns for a parent, but rarely about what I'm actually building with my life. She looked down at her hands. I suppose I didn't know how to ask about a world so different from my own experience. You could just ask what my typical day looks like, I suggested gently. Or what parts of my job I find most fulfilling. Or what challenges I'm facing. A heavy silence fell, but it felt different from before, thoughtful rather than tense. Allison spoke next, her voice quieter than usual. I think maybe I've been insecure about your success. It's easier to focus on what you don't have than acknowledge all that you've achieved. The admission surprised me. Allison had always seemed so confident in her choices, so certain of her path. Your life seems glamorous sometimes, she continued. Business trips to exciting cities, important meetings, recognition for your work. Meanwhile, I'm debating paint colors and worrying about mortgage rates. But that's what you wanted, I said, genuinely confused. You've always loved home and family above all else. I do, she nodded. But sometimes I wonder about the roads not taken. And maybe it's easier to tell myself your path is incomplete than to question whether I limited my own options too early. The honesty in her voice was disarming. For the first time in years, we were having a real conversation, not just performing our assigned family roles. My father cleared his throat. I may have been traditional in my thinking. Your mother and I built our lives a certain way, and it worked for us. It's hard to understand choices so different from our own.
I know, Dad.
and I respect the life you and Mom created. I just need you to understand that my happiness might look different from yours. My mother reached for my hand across the coffee table. We can try to do better, Jessica. We really do want you to be happy, however that looks. And I'll try to be less defensive, I offered. I know your questions come from love, even when they feel judgmental. Allison gave a tentative smile. So, tell us more about this building project. What made you choose that location? As I began explaining the details, the architectural significance of the space, the market research on entrepreneur needs, the community partnerships we were developing, I noticed my family listening differently. There were genuine questions about funding structures and renovation timelines. My father offered advice on property insurance that was actually helpful. My mother asked thoughtful questions about the women who would benefit from the program. For the first time, they were engaging with my world on its own terms, not through the lens of what they thought it should be. The conversation wasn't perfect. Old habits surfaced occasionally. My mother wondered if I'd meet eligible businessmen through the project. My father questioned whether the investment would interfere with future family plans if they arose. But there was also a new willingness to catch themselves, to recognize the patterns we were trying to break. As the evening wound down, we reached an understanding. Not complete resolution, but a beginning. They would try to see my choices as valid rather than lacking. I would try to share more of my life rather than withdrawing in anticipation of judgment. Maybe, Allison suggested as we prepared to head to bed, you could show us around Chicago sometime. Your neighborhood, your office, this building you're renovating. Help us see your world. The olive branch was exactly what we needed. I'd like that, I said sincerely. And I'd love to see your new house when you're settled. As I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because all our differences were resolved, but because we'd finally acknowledged them honestly. It was a first step toward genuine acceptance, imperfect, ongoing, but real. 1 month later, on a crisp December weekend, my family's SUV pulled up outside my downtown apartment building. I watched from my 23rd floor window as they emerged, my father helping my mother from the passenger seat, Allison and Greg gathering bags from the trunk. Their first visit to my Chicago home in over 3 years. My apartment had never felt so scrutinized as when I opened the door to welcome them. Suddenly, I saw it through their eyes. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the minimalist furniture in shades of gray and blue, the abstract art I'd collected from local artists, the absence of family photos except for one small frame on my desk. This is spectacular, my mother said, moving immediately to the windows. You can see the entire city from here. My father surveyed the space with appraising eyes. Good security in the building. Solid construction. How's the HOA? Reasonable. They maintain everything well, I replied, relieved he was focusing on practical matters rather than the lack of homey touches my mother had always found missing. Allison wandered around, taking in the details, my collection of books on marketing psychology and business ethics, the small but state-of-the-art kitchen where I rarely cooked elaborate meals, the dedicated office space with dual monitors and organized files. It's so you, she finally said, and I was surprised to hear genuine appreciation in her voice. I could never live with such clean lines and minimal stuff, but it suits your lifestyle perfectly. Thanks, I said, somewhat taken aback by their positive reactions. It's functional for how I live. I'm not here much during the week, but the views make weekend mornings special. We spent the morning catching up over coffee at my small dining table, the conversation easier than it had been in years. My mother had brought her famous cinnamon rolls, a peace offering of sorts, and we discussed their drive up, the holiday decorations along Michigan Avenue, the restaurant reservations I'd made for dinner. But first, I said, checking my watch, I thought we could see the Jenkins building project. The contractors are working today, but they know we're coming. 40 minutes later, we stood outside the imposing red brick building in the West Loop. Its Art Deco details had been obscured by years of neglect, but even in its current state, the architectural bones were impressive: tall windows, intricate stonework around the entrance, a corniced roofline that spoke to its 1920s origins. This is yours, my father asked, looking up at the six-story structure with new respect in his eyes. Mine and my investment partners, I corrected, leading them through the construction entrance. We close officially next week, but we've been allowed early access for planning and initial work. Inside was controlled chaos. Workers removing damaged interior walls, electricians assessing ancient wiring, preservationists carefully documenting original fixtures worth saving. I led my family through the dust and noise, pointing out what would become the main incubator space, the conference rooms, the child care center that would occupy part of the second floor. The original publishing company had this beautiful library, I explained, showing them a wood-paneled room with built-in shelves reaching to the ceiling. We're preserving it as a resource center and meeting space. Those brass light fixtures are original. We found vintage replacements for the missing ones. As I detailed our plans, the phased renovation, the sustainability features, the programs for first-time entrepreneurs, I watched my family's expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. My father asked intelligent questions about the financing structure. My mother was moved by the childcare provisions for working mothers. Even Greg, who'd seemed the most disconnected from my world, showed interest in the technical aspects of modernizing a historic building. Allison pulled me aside as the others examined the architectural renderings I'd brought. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "After Thanksgiving, I did a lot of thinking about why I felt so threatened by your choices. And I realized something important." She hesitated, then continued. "When we were kids, I was always the good one, following rules, meeting expectations. You were braver, questioning things, finding your own way. Part of me envied that, even while I was collecting approval for my conventional choices." The confession surprised me. "I always thought you had it all figured out," I admitted. "You seemed so certain about what you wanted." "I was certain about what was expected," she corrected. "There's a difference. Don't get me wrong, I do want the house, the family, the community involvement. But sometimes I wonder if I explored enough before settling on that path." "It's not too late to explore other dimensions of yourself," I said. "Having a home and family doesn't mean you can't also pursue other interests or ambitions." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's partly why I wanted to see all this. To understand that there are different ways to create meaning." She gestured around the space. "What you're building here, it's going to help so many people. It's a different kind of legacy than what I've chosen, but it's just as significant." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship, from competition to mutual appreciation, from judgment to understanding. We were different women making different choices, both valid, both meaningful in their own ways. The Christmas gathering at my parents' home the following week reflected this evolving dynamic. There were still moments of tension. Old habits don't disappear overnight, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. I brought Natalie as my guest, introducing my family to the friend who had been my support system for years. They welcomed her warmly, my father engaging her in conversation about market trends, my mother insisting she try every holiday dish. When Natalie mentioned our volunteer work with the girls' coding program, my parents asked thoughtful questions rather than changing the subject. Allison and Greg shared updates about their new house without the previous undercurrent of superior satisfaction. They'd moved in 2 weeks earlier and were still arranging furniture, choosing window treatments, adjusting to new routines. "We have a spare room that would be perfect for your Chicago friends if you all want to visit sometime," Allison offered. "The neighborhood has some great restaurants within walking distance." The invitation was genuine, not a commentary on my lifestyle, just an extension of hospitality. I accepted with equal sincerity. Later that evening, my mother found me alone in the kitchen, putting away leftovers. "I've been thinking about our conversation at Thanksgiving," she said, arranging cookies on a plate. "About how we never really asked about your work or understood what you were building." I nodded, uncertain where she was going with this. "I joined a book club," she continued. "We're reading about women entrepreneurs throughout history. Did you know Madam C.J. Walker built a hair care empire that made her America's first female self-made millionaire? And she was the daughter of slaves." The image of my traditional mother studying female business pioneers made me smile. "That's wonderful, Mom. What prompted this interest?" I want to understand your world better, she said simply. And maybe I've been limited in my thinking about what women can accomplish. Your generation has different opportunities, different expectations. She arranged the last cookie with precise care. I still worry about you sometimes. Working too hard, not having someone to care for you when you're sick, missing out on the joy children bring. That's a mother's prerogative. But I'm trying to see that you've built safeguards and support systems I didn't consider.
I short her.
And if someday I do want partnership or family, it will be in addition to my life, not a replacement for what I've built. She nodded, accepting this in a way she couldn't have a month ago. Just promise me one thing. Don't close yourself off to possibilities because you're afraid they'll derail your plans. Sometimes the best things in life aren't planned at all. I promise, I said, hugging her. I'm open to whatever brings genuine fulfillment, whether that follows convention or not. In the months that followed, I continued the process of self-healing, examining my defensive reactions, acknowledging both the strengths and limitations of my choices, building deeper connections with those who accepted me as I was. I created meaning through mentoring younger women in business, through transforming the Jenkins building into a hub of female entrepreneurship, through maintaining authentic relationships rather than superficial networks. I found community in unlikely places, a weekend pottery class where I was terrible but happy, a neighborhood association where I contributed marketing expertise, Natalie's extended family, who adopted me for casual Sunday dinners. I even started dating again, more openly and honestly than before, not from pressure or fear of being alone, but from a place of self-knowledge and genuine desire for connection. Some relationships lasted a few weeks, others a few months. None had yet become permanent, but each added dimension to my life rather than defining it. The true breakthrough came when I realized that settling down had nothing to do with geography, property ownership, or relationship status. It was about settling into yourself, your values, your purpose, your authentic way of being in the world. By that definition, I had settled down years ago, establishing firm foundations for a life of meaning and impact. The Jenkins building opened its doors 8 months after that fateful Thanksgiving. My entire family attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing proudly as I delivered a speech about creating opportunities for women to define success on their own terms. Afterward, a young entrepreneur approached to thank me for creating the space she couldn't find elsewhere, affordable, supportive, understanding of her needs as both a businesswoman and a single mother. This changed everything for my daughter and me, she said simply. That evening, watching the sunset from the building's rooftop garden, surrounded by family and colleagues who finally saw and respected my choices, I found peace with my path. It wasn't perfect. No life is, but it was authentically mine. The judgments of others, even those I loved, could no longer shake that foundation. The lesson I learned through that difficult Thanksgiving and its aftermath was profound. True happiness comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from living in alignment with your own values and purpose. Success has many definitions, none inherently more valid than others. And freedom comes from setting boundaries with love, allowing space for difference while maintaining connection. Have you ever had to defend your life choices to family? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their path is valid too. Remember, we all have different journeys, and that diversity is what makes our human tapestry so rich and beautiful. Thank you for listening, and may you find peace with your own unique path.